Hello everybody, this is Manu S and welcome to another Eternal Contenders video series. So today I got a really sweet new deck for you. It's called Combrei Flightschool. It's inspired by an earlier similar deck that Serino called Combrei Flightschool as well and played in I think the penultimate invitational of the last ETS season, I think. And yeah, it's a Combrei aggro deck. One or the other of you might have seen me play it yesterday in the first team league match of our team. It did quite well, although we had some pretty bad luck with draws. And I figured it's time to officially unveil it to everyone and provide you with the full scoop on the deck after you've already seen it in action. So let's dive right in without further ado. Here's Combrei Flightschool post the Dusk Road. Okay, so here we have the deck. This is basically a very aggressive evasion-based Combrei deck. So for a change we have a strong and hyper-aggressive aggro deck that is not fire-based, so that's cool. And the deck is pretty different from other aggro decks and plays out in a pretty cool way and is also extremely strong, I found. Okay, so let's talk about the units first. We have 8 1-drops for District Infantry and for Gloaming Wisp. Infantry, while not evasive, is the heaviest hitting 1-drop the deck could play, and there's also not really other good evasive 1-drops. Gloaming Wisp is the only one. The others are all like Humbug or Valkyrie Aspirant, just like 1 power 1/1s, and they're just not good enough. I actually had one Valkyrie Aspirant in the deck for a while, but I cut it eventually. Next we have Gloaming Wisp. Gloaming Wisp, I have to eat my words a bit on that one. I called the card pretty unplayable in both formats in the review, I think. Turns out this deck is the exception, since before I didn't really see a hyper-aggressive time-based aggro deck that would care enough about a simple 1/1 flyer for the Nightfall to make a difference. But yeah, Nightfall is basically good in my opinion if you're low curve and hyper-aggressive enough, and a 1/1 flying usually is just too weak, but in a deck like this that gets so much out of flyers and has nice synergies with them, Gloaming Wisp fits right in just as a synergy card. Also, one quick note, I will talk about some cards that I did not include or tried and cut again after discussing all the cards that are in the deck. Someone on the YouTube comments, I don't remember the name right now, suggested that for future videos. And I think it's kind of a nice idea and gives the deck text a bit more structure, so I'll try it this time. So if you want to hear about the cards that I considered or tried and that didn't make the cut, wait till the end of the deck tech. Okay, next we have the 2-drops. For Awakened Student, once again not a flyer, but one of the best 2-drops in the game. It can easily win games on its own, because it just grows so big and always demands an answer, and that's a lot for a 2-drop. A 2-drop that is a must answer, because it might otherwise win you the game, is as good as they come, so it just has to be in here even without the flying. It basically adds to the beatdown when the ground is not locked up, or helps lock up the ground while we race in the air against other ground dudes. Then we have 4 Eager Owlet and 4 Overseer as premium flying 2-drops. Owlet is a conditional 2 power 3/3. Thanks to Gloaming Wisp we can already play it sometimes as a 3/3 on turn 2, deterring any smaller units from attacking, which gives you a lot of momentum against aggressive decks. Normally if it's an 0/3 they can just swing and get their Warcry off, you block, nothing happens, maybe they have 2 units already, so you still take damage from one. now if you have an Owlet and they have like an Oni and an Outlaw, they can't attack as long as they don't have a removal for one of the flyers. And Overseer is similar. It's a lot weaker on turn 2 because of the 2 health, so it usually virtually reads can't block, because you really don't want to trade it for like their 1-drop, so it's just a purely offensive unit, but the deck has some ways of buffing it. We have 1 Hourglass and 4 Obelisk to take some advantage of the ability, so it's virtually maybe like a 2.3 or 2.5 or something. Anyway, it's a bit better in this deck than a vanilla 2/2 flying for 2 would be, and we would still play that. And then last but not least, we have 3 Desert Marshal as 2-drops. This is not really a 2-drop, it's more of a spell really in the deck most of the time. It does a bunch of things. It shuts down opposing flyers, life stealers, and Sandstorm Titans, so we can guaranteed race in the air without being stalled. It also helps do stuff like silence away, permafrost and stuff like that, or silence, say, at Havrod to not get raised by that. There's just a bunch of utility units that this is really worth using against, and it also has the benefit of profitably interacting with killer and relic weapons to protect our premium flyers. So it just is a nice multi-purpose card. It's a bit weak here, but there's really no better options, and the better options would also probably have to be 1-cost cards to make it worth it. That's like my main beef, because the deck has a ton of 2-cost cards, which is a bit awkward, and could have a few more 1-cost cards instead, but there really aren't any. And then last but not least, we have 4 Unseen Commando and 4 Valkyrie Enforcer to top out the unit curve. Commando is part of what made the deck so much better. It first of all, it's a 3/4 flying lifesteal unit when it attacks. That's already super good. It allowed the deck to go a bit more aggressive and have a more consistent flying theme than before. Before, these were like Seraphs, which were like okay, but mostly just like kind of a ground blocker, not that good at attacking and stuff. And it also, with lowering the curve, allowed us to go up to 4 Stand Together, and Unseen Commando together with Stand Together basically triggers on all the flyers, because all the flyers then are flying Aegis, so the trigger the Unseen Commando ability, so Stand Together effectively gives all flyers +2/+2 as long as we have a commando out, so that's super powerful, and also makes it super hard for the opponent to stop our race in the air or board sweep us, and then they have to just hope and race us, which is pretty hard against a hyper-aggressive evasive deck like that usually. So yeah, Unseen Commando, one of the best cards to come out of the Dusk Road actually, and this is one of the decks where it really shines. And then we have Valkyrie Enforcer. I mean, another 3 attack flyer for 3 is a great deal, and the silence attached to it deals with Titans, deals with flyers, deals with all the things Marshal does. It's basically a better Desert Marshal, and just amazing. So let's talk about the non-unit cards. We have for Finest Hour. The card is not insane in the deck actually due to the evasive nature. You're not gonna get that much into combat situations where you like need to Finest Hour to win combat. But if you do, Finest Hour is there for you, and it does a bunch of other things that can be nice against relic weapons or just like damage-based removal like Torch and stuff. But the other card is not as good as it is in other aggressive decks, so but still good enough to include. The options are limited really. Then we have 1 Infinite Hourglass. Hourglass serves a couple of purposes here. First of all, it's a 1-cost thing that buffs all 4 Tinkers, so that's one of the nice synergies. The other is Unseen Commando. Every flyer also turns into a 2 battle skill unit thanks to Hourglass, so it's kind of like the 5th Stand Together for Commando in a way, making all these 1-drops suddenly 1 bigger when you have Commando out, and it also stops or breaks stuff like Permafrost, stops Cinder Yeti or Crystallize. There's not many Crystallize right now, but there's a fair share of Permafrost and Cinder Yetis, so that definitely matters. And the last thing is that it helps with racing, because having endurance on all our units keeps the smaller units of the opponent from attacking potentially, so they can only race with their bigger units, which makes it even harder for them to win against our aggressive air force. So I felt like a one-off is pretty decent to bring down the curve a bit and have all the mentioned synergies. And so far I quite liked it. And we have 2 Protect. Card is not super good, simply because the individual unit quality in that deck is both pretty low and the units are pretty cheap. Protect is at its best when it's protecting high cost, high quality units that can win you the game. But it does a couple of things here. Protecting cards like Student, a flyer for Owlet, or Unseen Commando is pretty nice. These are like probably the 3 best protect targets. It can do other things. It can protect yourself against burn that's killing you to win the race for them. Removal on Obelisk to protect the Obelisk sometimes. Once again, it's an Aegis giver to turn on the 2nd battle skill for Commando on a specific unit at worst. So yeah, there's a couple of things it does. It's not great, but it's an okay card. And then we have 4 Vanquish. Initially I think I had 4 Marshal and 3 Vanquish, but I think especially with the Dusk Road now, there's even more Vanquish targets, and the things that we can Vanquish are either cards that stop us from racing, like Titan and big flyers, or simply big ground guys that make it easier for the opponent to race. So having Vanquish for their biggest guy makes it that much easier to stay ahead in the race and win the race. So 4 Vanquish is just worth it. And sometimes if push comes to shove, given that Finest Hour is also limited in use in the deck, you sometimes can just Finest Hour Vanquish something if you really have to. That comes up sometimes. And yeah, then we have the 4 Stand Together. Pretty great to have an Anthem effect with all the 1 and 2 drop units in the deck. Then the mentioned synergies with Commando and a counter to sweeper effects and spot removal. Yeah, the card is brutal. One of the cards that makes the deck work and tick in a lot of matchups. And last but not least, we have Obelisk. Card is not insane here, especially because it's usually not gonna be double activated, and it's fairly expensive, but in a deck with so many cheap units that are all cheaper than Obelisk, Enzymes are at their best in a way, because you often have 3 or 4 units out by the time you play Obelisk, and then you get 3/3 or 4/4 in stats as charge, sometimes 1 more because of Overseer. That's another nice synergy. And getting extra stats on your Commando for the lifesteal is also nice, and so on and so forth. So Obelisk is still pretty good, although not incredible or great. And then we have 25 power. The 25 power works pretty well thanks to Gloaming Wisp with Nightfall helping out a bit in addition, and most of the deck costing 1 and 2 and only having a bunch of 3s and 1 4-drop. And a 4-drop that you don't always have to play on turn 4. It's fine if you play Obelisk as one of the last cards of the game a lot of the time. So 25 power has been doing pretty well, and the deck also floods pretty poorly. Flooding out is very painful for the deck. Normally with 4 4-drops, and depending on the curve, I sometimes like 26 power in aggressive decks to make sure you hit your 4-drop more often and get to 3 all the time. But in this deck, 25 is great. I would even almost feel like I might sometimes consider 24, but then again the deck usually loses the easiest when it's stuck on 2. Tabu said that when he tried the deck a bit before the TM League and was like, yeah, deck felt powerful. I only really lost when I had 2 power. So yeah, 25 power probably a sweet spot here. Having some ways to virtually increase power without having more power would be nice to make sure we always hit that third power, but currently there's no real other option. And yeah, talking about cards that didn't make the cut, District Infantry initially used to be Initiative of the Sands, which is nice with Obelisk theoretically. The deck also used to have like 28 power, because it used to run Seraph and overall had a bit higher curve because it didn't have Gloaming Wisp, only had 1/1-drop and so on. But and it had more 4-drops. But yeah, ultimately the deck turned a bit more evasive and hyper-aggressive with Commando, because it allowed us to go up withstand, and if you go up withstand you want more units and cheaper units and so on. And yeah, Initiate was a bit underwhelming because Obelisk was still hard to get to 8, so Initiate didn't do that much, and I was a ground guy. Infantry just hit so much better. And yeah, more 4-drops, not that impressive, kind of slow when you want to like stand together on like turn 4 or something. You don't really want to play a 4-drop, you want to play stand together or Obelisk. Deck used to run some Disciples, Marizen's Disciples, and I tried cards like Great Parliament and stuff, but yeah, they were all pretty mediocre and slow. So I'm glad to having gotten rid of them. And yeah, I tried 1 or 2 Valkyrie Aspirant, which is okay, but it's a bit underwhelming and makes you more dependent on drawing stand together and Obelisk, because if you don't, then they kind of suck. Sometimes it can come up that you flood out in a grindy game and you ultimate Aspirant, but that's like once in a lifetime deal, so not great. And yeah, the options for the deck are just really limited. I also considered running like 2 Rune Hammers for additional synergy with Overseer and as like an additional removal or threat on an empty board against more reactive decks. But the problem is having 2 more 4-drops like that, and Hammer gets worse every turn you don't play it, so you really want to have it on 4, would require me to go up by 1 power. So I would have to cut like the Hourglass into Protect for 2 Hammer and a power, like a Monument or a Sigil. And that would mostly do one thing, it would make the deck a bit more clunky and slow, and that's kind of the opposite of what I want, so I decided against it. But yeah, I could see trying 2 Hammer and a power, like a Emerald Monument at some point, just to see how that feels in comparison, because Protect is really also not that great, and Hourglass is situationally nice. But Hammer is a powerful card, and having a 26 power that is also a bit of flood protection helps infantry and hitting that 3rd power. So there are merits to that. And other than that, I think there's not really anything playable right now. The options for the deck are pretty limited. The deck plays almost all the cards that you can even consider. When you already start considering Valkyrie Aspirant, you notice that you're kind of out of realistic options. The deck unfortunately doesn't have enough Valkyries to run Valkyrie Spire Guard, because the other Valkyries are all too weak. Like the 2 power 1/2 is not what this deck wants or needs, and there's also no good enough 3-cost Valkyrie. I mean, are we really gonna play the 2/1 Valkyrie ally that turns into a 3/2 when we already have 12 3-drops and we're not gonna cut Commando or stand together for it? Also, every time we have that Valkyrie and don't have another Valkyrie and it's a 2/1, it's gonna be like super sad. So yeah, I mean, maybe there's like some world in which you cut the obelisks for Spire Guards and maybe like these 3 and a stand together for the Valkyrie ally or something, but that still doesn't sound great. Like having 12 3-drop units and 3 stand together seems pretty clunky, and the flyers, like the Spire Guards, are almost a bit slow, like I said, for 4-drops, and they also turn on Vanquish and make it pretty efficient for the opponent, and generally make their cheap removal better, like Annihilate becomes better and so on, because they can get more tempo with it. But one could try it. I mean, I guess Valkyrie Aspirant is something that helps the Spire Guard, but not sure if I want to put Aspirant in the deck for Spire Guard, especially not over, say, Gloaming Wisp, because the Nightfall really does a lot for the deck here and makes this card that much better than a Humbug. Although it's a bit awkward that it's a time 1-drop in a deck that is heavily geared towards Justice, but yeah. These are like the final thoughts on the deck. And yeah, I really like the list and the deck. A lot of fun, it's really powerful, and also probably a great deck on ladder and in tournament going forward. So you probably won't have seen the last of it. Okay, that's it for the deck tech. As usual, gonna hop into some games to show the deck in action. Gonna play 6 games in Masters with it to show you how it performs in action currently and how to properly pilot it. So stay tuned for the first game coming up in a moment. Don't go anywhere.